Thank you. Further debate, member for Waterloo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to join the debate today on Bill 161. And I want to start off by just saying a special shout out to my folks, Alan and Sheila Wood in Peterborough, who've been watching the debate. They also sometimes send me, funny little comments on what's happening here, and I can assure you that they're not very impressed. I do also want to give a shout out to Kate Crozier, the Director of Programs at the Community Justice Initiative in Waterloo, who is one of those voices that probably should have been consulted on a piece of legislation like this one. And I just want to start off by saying, some people in this province don't know that we start off some mornings with a prayer, non-denominational usually. And one of the prayers that we say is, give to each member of this legislature a strong and abiding sense of the great responsibilities laid upon us. Guide us in our deliberations, give us a deep and thorough understanding of the needs of the people we serve, and help us to use power wisely and well. And it strikes me as very meaningful in this context of this particular debate because for some reason the government has looked at the Auditor General's report as it relates to access to legal aid and justice in the province of Ontario, and they have tabled this particular bill, which of note is an omnibus piece of legislation, almost all of which has to do with the administration of justice, but in essence is an attack on access to justice in Ontario. There are problematic schedules: Schedule 3, the Civil Remedies Act; Schedule 4, the Class Proceedings Act; Schedule 11, the Judicial Review Procedure Act, which appears to give the court greater discretion to deny relief under judicial review, and Schedule 15-16, the Legal Aid Services Act, which appears to unilaterally cancel all funding arrangements for clinics 6 months after this legislation comes into force. So to say that we have serious concerns with Bill 161 would really and truly be an understatement, Mr. Speaker. What can we do better? We can start off by not cutting legal aid. That's a good place to start. And if we want to improve the justice system, we need to speak to people who are working in it every day, making a positive impact. That, unfortunately, did not happen. And particularly the people who are working as lawyers or with incarcerated folks or in restorative justice, because there are solutions to the backlog in our court system. There are community solutions that have existed that the Liberals ignored for 15 years. And so I went to the people who are on the front lines, because that's sort of how we work here on this side. We went to the Community Justice Initiatives in Waterloo Region, which has been leading the way on restorative justice as a way of addressing conflict and crime. They support people impacted by sexual trauma, provide assistance to families involved with child protection, and reintegration support for adults returning to the community. Their work is wide-ranging and effective and offers a number of solutions for the issues that our justice system currently faces in Ontario. And one of those folks was Kate Crozier, who is the Director of Community Justice Initiatives. And, it's been made, the many comments on our House have been said, the state of our prisons, and I've toured 3 major prisons in the province of Ontario, Maplehurst and Vanier, and a federal prison as well. And I have to tell you, when you learn that 60% of prisoners, inmates, are on remand, they have not had their day in justice. They may be innocent. They do not have the funding to post bail. They may be innocent. They may go into those institutions innocent. They do not come out of those institutions innocent. And quite honestly, Mr. Speaker, I wish I could unsee some of the things that I saw in our prisons. There's no doubt about it that our jails are disproportionately incarcerate marginalized citizens in this province. Rather than learning accountability or to addressing root causes of crime, jails push people further into the margins, and it is not sustainable. Does Bill 161 address this? No, it does not. 1/3 of those inmates in our institutions have identified mental health needs. Should people with mental health needs be in a prison? No, they should not. In fact, when I once saw in Vanier, the women's prison, there was a woman there who had been there for years in solitary confinement, and she was desperate for human contact. Most of the people who are incarcerated are unemployed or underemployed. Most women in prison are mothers, and most of these have children under the age of 16. Indigenous people make up 2% of Ontario's population, and that in 2016, they made up 13% of those in provincial custody. And quite honestly, they serve more time in segregation than non-Indigenous inmates and are more likely to be flagged with a suicide risk. This knowledge actually was accrued and gathered by the Ministry of Children and Community Service and Corrections Services in Ontario, and it's called a report. This report is Directions for Reform. It's 2017. One would think that this knowledge, this data, this information would inform a piece of legislation that was looking to improve access to justice. We even have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which found that the correctional system had inadequate programming to address and respond to the conditions and precursors that Indigenous offenders may experience, and that there was a lack of realistic alternatives to custody. Part of that commission, of course, meant to say, or addressed undertaking reforms to the criminal justice system to better address the needs of offenders with fetal alcohol spectrum, for instance, Mr. Speaker, and navigating the court system without supports within that system and without access to legal advice has proven to be a systemic issue in the justice system. Does Bill 161 address that? No, it does not. So we have ministry reports which should inform this piece of legislation. We have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which one of their major recommendations was culturally relevant and responsive justice system. And there was some funding attached to that, but that funding did not flow. And that was part of the problem of the previous government. So we know that Ontario jails are setting people up for failure when they leave. We know that they leave into a state of homelessness. 40%, Mr. Speaker, of adult males released from Toronto jails were either homeless or at risk of being homeless. And yet there are solutions that this government could employ, could address, and actually, ironically, would save some money. Right now, there are programs, for instance, in Waterloo, there's the Stride for Women and Stride Men, which is an engagement from the public to be part of the solution of successful reintegration and to help navigate through the court system. And they're helping by navigating, talking to landlords, reuniting with family, finding good counselors, and needed medical attention. The Stride program in particular for women is an example of evidence-based, successful, and extremely cost-effective programs that specifically targets the needs of women. And it is one of the rare programs in Canada that provide a continuum of support by building relationships inside the prison and maintaining them after a woman is released from an institution. So at the end of the day, there are meaningful opportunities that are accountable that can address the backlog in our court system and in our justice system. And restorative justice organizations are ready to do this type of work right now. They want to partner with this government. And the savings versus $500 a day for a restorative, 3-day restorative justice program versus $35,000 in court and in jail at a sentencing hearing is quite astounding to me, Mr. Speaker. You know, the Society of United Professionals, on their commentary on the cuts to legal aid and their description of Bill 161, have said that at the time of the announcement, they said, the amendments to the Legal Aid Services Act is a cynical ploy to distract from the extraordinary damage that this bill will do to Ontario's legal system and the most vulnerable people in that system. They went on to say that when this legislation was announced on December 9th, that it literally removes access to justice from Legal Aid Ontario's purpose, in tandem with their 30% cut to Legal Aid Ontario in last April's budget. The Society, which represents Legal Aid Ontario lawyers as well as legal professionals at 3 legal clinics, called this the biggest attack on legal aid in Ontario's history. And so I guess that I'm looking forward to the questions. I enjoy this part of the debate. The government had an opportunity to address some of the core issues, cost savings, ethical changes that could be made, and yet Bill 161 did not address that. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.